A black girl runs into a millionaire's wedding, screaming a warning that halts the ceremony in its tracks. Her urgent message, "Don't marry her, she is," unfolds a mystery deeply woven into their elite society. Who is this girl, and what secrets does she hold that could unravel lives? Why must the wedding stop? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The morning sun cast a golden glow over the Mansfield Estate's limestone walls. Dozens of people rushed across the perfectly manicured lawns, their footsteps quick and purposeful. Wedding planners with clipboards darted between towering flower arrangements, while servants adjusted white silk ribbons that danced in the gentle spring breeze. "The champagne towers need to be centered perfectly," called out the head planner, her voice carrying across the grand terrace. Mr. Mansfield was very specific about the placement. Luxury cars began rolling through the iron gates, their polished surfaces gleaming. Distinguished guests emerged, their designer outfits matching the grandeur of the occasion. Old college friends embraced with loud laughs, while distant relatives exchanged warm greetings and admired the estate's magnificence. "Did you see the ice sculpture? It must be 20 feet tall," one guest remarked, gesturing toward the garden where crystalline angels seemed to dance in the sunlight. Inside the mansion's east wing, Gregory Mansfield stood before a full-length mirror, adjusting his bow tie for the 10th time. His hands trembled slightly as he smoothed down his custom-made tuxedo jacket. "Here, let me help with that," said James, his best man and oldest friend, stepping forward to straighten the tie. "You're going to wear it out if you keep fiddling with it." Gregory let out a shaky breath. "I just want everything to be perfect today." "And it will be," James assured him, placing a steadying hand on his shoulder. "I've known you since prep school, Greg. I've seen you close billion-dollar deals without breaking a sweat, but I've never seen you this happy." Gregory's reflection smiled back at him, his eyes bright with emotion. "This is different. This isn't about business or money. This is about love, about starting a new chapter." Through the window, they could hear the string quartet beginning their warm-up. The melodic notes drifted upward, mixing with the cheerful chatter of arriving guests. The wedding coordinator poked her head into the room. "Mr. Mansfield, the guests are being seated now." Gregory nodded, taking one final look in the mirror. The afternoon sun streamed through stained glass windows, creating patterns of colored light across the floor. Guests filed into their seats beneath the elaborate flower arch, their excited whispers filling the air. The officiant, a distinguished-looking man in traditional robes, took his position at the altar. The quartet began playing soft, elegant music that floated through the air like a gentle caress. Gregory stood at the front, his posture straight and proud, while his heart raced with anticipation. Rebecca sat perfectly still in her silk-cushioned chair, surrounded by the gentle rustle of taffeta and the soft murmur of excited voices. The bridal suite, with its cream-colored walls and crystal chandeliers, felt like a sanctuary of calm amid the day's whirlwind of activity. "You look absolutely breathtaking," Sarah, her maid of honor, whispered as she carefully adjusted the diamond-encrusted hairpiece nestled in Rebecca's dark curls. The mirror reflected back an image that made Rebecca's heart skip a beat. Her wedding gown, with its intricate lace bodice and flowing silk skirt, seemed to capture every bit of light in the room. Tiny crystals sparkled with each movement, creating a subtle shimmer that made her appear to glow from within. "I can't believe this day is finally here," Rebecca said softly, touching the delicate pearl necklace at her throat, a gift from Gregory on their first anniversary of dating. "Remember when we first met? I spilled coffee all over his expensive suit." The bridesmaids laughed warmly at the memory. "And instead of being upset, he asked you to dinner," Emma, her cousin, added with a smile. "He knew right then," Sarah said, smoothing a loose strand of Rebecca's hair. "We all did. The way he looked at you." Rebecca took a deep breath, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The butterflies in her stomach seemed to multiply with each passing minute. "I'm ready," she announced, standing carefully as her bridesmaids gathered around to adjust her train. The double doors opened to reveal the grand hallway, its marble floors gleaming beneath crystal chandeliers. As Rebecca stepped out, the wedding coordinator gave a subtle signal, and the music shifted to the familiar strains of the wedding march. The massive wooden doors to the ceremony space swung open, revealing rows upon rows of standing guests. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, creating a natural spotlight down the white carpeted aisle. Flowers in shades of cream and blush lined the path, their sweet fragrance filling the air. Camera flashes sparkled like stars as Rebecca took her first step. Her gown moved like water behind her, the delicate train trailing gracefully across the carpet. Gasps of admiration rippled through the crowd as she passed, her face glowing with joy beneath the gossamer veil. Each step brought her closer to Gregory, who stood tall and handsome at the altar. Their eyes met across the distance, and the rest of the world seemed to fade away. Rebecca's nervous smile bloomed into something deeper, more profound as she saw the look of pure adoration on Gregory's face. Finally, she reached the altar steps. Gregory extended his hand, and Rebecca placed her fingers in his, feeling the slight tremor in his touch that matched her own excitement. They turned to face the officiant, who smiled warmly at the couple before addressing the assembled guests. "Dearly beloved," the officiant began, his voice rich and clear in the hushed space. "We are gathered here today." The atmosphere in the grand room was electric with joy and anticipation as the ceremony began, every heart in attendance touched by the obvious love between the bride and groom. The officiant's warm voice filled the grand hall as he spoke about love and commitment. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns across the gathered guests. In the front row, elderly women dabbed at their eyes with delicate handkerchiefs while proud family members beamed with joy. Gregory held Rebecca's hands tenderly, his thumbs gently caressing her fingers as they listened to the traditional words. The peaceful moment wrapped around them like a soft blanket, everything exactly as it should be. Suddenly, the heavy wooden doors at the back of the church burst open with a thunderous bang. Heads whipped around and gasps echoed through the hall. Lillian stood in the doorway, her chest heaving as she tried to catch her breath. Her usually perfectly styled hair was windswept, and her face was flushed with urgency. "Stop!" Lillian's voice cracked with emotion as she stumbled forward down the aisle. "You have to stop this wedding." The officiant paused mid-sentence, his mouth hanging open in shock. Rebecca's grip on Gregory's hands tightened as they both turned to stare at their friend. "Lillian, what are you doing?" Gregory's voice was tight with confusion and embarrassment. Lillian's eyes filled with tears as she reached the altar steps. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence. "But Rebecca can't marry Gregory because—" She swallowed hard, her next words falling like bombs in the quiet space. "Because she's his sister." The words seemed to hang in the air for an endless moment. Then chaos erupted. Guests began whispering furiously to each other, their voices growing louder with each passing second. Camera phones appeared from purses and pockets, their flashes adding to the mayhem. Rebecca's hand slipped from Gregory's grasp as she staggered backward. "What?" she whispered, her face draining of color beneath her veil. That's impossible." Gregory stood frozen, his expression a mask of disbelief and horror. "Lillian, this isn't funny," he managed to say, though his voice shook. The large doors burst open again, this time revealing several reporters who had been waiting outside to cover the society wedding. They rushed forward, microphones extended, shouting questions over the growing din of shocked guests. "Mr. Mansfield, did you know about this allegation?" "Miss, how did you discover this information?" "Rebecca, would you care to comment?" The officiant tried to restore order, raising his hands for silence, but his voice was lost in the commotion. The elegant wedding had dissolved into chaos in mere seconds, with some guests standing on pews to get a better view, while others rushed to comfort the shell-shocked couple. Through it all, Rebecca and Gregory remained rooted to their spots at the altar, separated by just a few feet that suddenly felt like an unbridgeable chasm. Their perfect day had shattered around them, leaving only confusion and horror in its wake. In the midst of the growing chaos, Gregory's best man pulled Lillian forward to explain herself. She clutched a worn leather portfolio to her chest, her hands trembling as she faced the stunned couple. "I found these while helping clean out your father's study last week, Gregory," Lillian said, her voice shaking. She opened the portfolio and pulled out a stack of yellowed letters, held together with a faded ribbon. They're letters between your father and Rebecca's mother, spanning over 3 decades. The whispers in the church grew louder. Rebecca's mother, seated in the front row, covered her mouth with both hands, her eyes wide with recognition. I stayed up all night reading them, Lillian continued, her words tumbling out faster now. They detail everything, their relationship, their affair. She turned to Rebecca, tears streaming down her face. It started before either of you were born, but the letters from 30 years ago, they talk about Rebecca's birth. Gregory stepped forward, his face pale. Give me those, he demanded, reaching for the letters with trembling hands. Lillian handed them over, and Gregory began scanning the pages, his expression growing more horrified with each line he read. Rebecca moved closer, peering over his shoulder at the familiar handwriting of her mother. The media pressed closer, their cameras clicking rapidly. Several reporters were already speaking into their phones, breaking the story to their networks. The wedding guests' reactions ranged from shocked gasps to angry mutters about scandal and shame. My dearest love, Gregory read aloud from one letter, his voice cracking. Our beautiful daughter has your eyes. He stopped reading, looking up at Rebecca with dawning horror. Rebecca stepped back, her wedding dress rustling against the altar steps. She turned to look at her mother, who was now openly weeping in the front row. Mom? Her voice was barely a whisper. Is this true? The silence that followed was deafening. Rebecca's mother's sob was all the confirmation needed. Rebecca's face contorted with emotion. Anger, betrayal, disgust, and heartbreak all fighting for dominance. She grabbed her elaborate skirts in her fists, knuckles white with tension. I can't be here, she choked out. Without another word, she turned and fled down the aisle, her white dress billowing behind her like a ghost. Several bridesmaids called after her, but she didn't stop. The heavy church doors slammed behind her with a thunderous boom that echoed through the hall. Gregory remained at the altar, the letters clutched in his hands, looking lost and broken. His eyes stayed fixed on the doors through which Rebecca had disappeared, but he made no move to follow her. The weight of the revelation seemed to have frozen him in place, as the chaos of media and guests swirled around him like a storm. Rebecca stumbled through the estate's garden paths, her wedding dress catching on rose bushes and low-hanging branches. Tears blurred her vision as she sought refuge among the meticulously maintained flower beds. Her bridesmaids followed at a careful distance, their heels clicking on the stone pathway. "Rebecca, please wait," called Sarah, her maid of honor. "Let us help you." Finally, Rebecca collapsed onto a stone bench near the garden's koi pond. Her chest heaved with sobs as she buried her face in her hands, smearing her carefully applied makeup. The bridesmaids gathered around her, forming a protective circle. How could Lillian do this to me? Rebecca's voice cracked with anger and hurt. If she knew something this important, why didn't she come to me privately? Why wait until I was standing at the altar in front of everyone? Maria, her cousin and bridesmaid, knelt beside her. Maybe she thought she was doing the right thing. You know how Lillian can be, always charging ahead without thinking things through. But to humiliate me like this? Rebecca's hands twisted in her lap. To let the media capture every moment? They're probably writing headlines right now about the billionaire who almost married his sister. She choked on a bitter laugh. We don't even know if it's true, Jennifer, another bridesmaid, offered gently. Old letters don't prove anything. There could be some mistake, or maybe we're all jumping to conclusions. Rebecca shook her head, mascara-stained tears rolling down her cheeks. You didn't see my mother's face. She couldn't even deny it. All these years. Her voice trailed off as fresh tears welled up. The bridesmaids exchanged worried glances, at a loss for words. The distant sound of chaos from the church drifted across the gardens, car doors slamming, voices shouting, cameras clicking. What am I supposed to do now? Rebecca whispered, more to herself than to her friends. She looked down at her wedding dress, now dirty at the hem and torn in places from her flight through the garden. Everything I thought I knew about my life feels like a lie. Sarah reached out to touch her shoulder, but Rebecca flinched away. She stood up suddenly, backing away from her concerned friends. I need to be alone," she said, wiping at her tears with trembling hands. "Please, I know you're trying to help, but I can't handle anyone else right now. I just need space to think." "Rebecca, are you sure?" Sarah asked, worry etched across her face. "Yes," Rebecca replied firmly, already turning away. "Please, just tell everyone to leave me alone for a while. I'll be fine. I need time." Without waiting for their response, she walked deeper into the gardens, following a winding path that led toward the estate's elaborate maze. Her white dress stood out starkly against the green hedges as she disappeared around a corner, leaving her concerned bridesmaids behind. Gregory stood motionless at the altar, his polished shoes rooted to the spot where, moments ago, he should have been exchanging vows with Rebecca. The magnificent church, with its soaring, stained glass windows and ornate decorations, now felt suffocating. Whispers echoed off the vaulted ceiling as guests huddled in small groups, their phones occasionally lighting up as they undoubtedly shared the scandal with others. His cousin James approached cautiously. "Greg, do you want us to—" "Everyone needs to leave," Gregory interrupted, his voice firm but quiet. "Please, I need the room cleared." James nodded and began helping other family members usher the guests toward the exits. The murmuring grew louder as people gathered their belongings, some casting sympathetic glances his way, others barely concealing their eagerness to spread the gossip. As the church emptied, Gregory loosened his bow tie and sank into the first pew. His mind raced through memories of his childhood, searching for signs he might have missed. He remembered his father's long business trips, the hushed phone calls, and the way his mother would sometimes cry when she thought no one was watching. There had been countless dinner parties where Rebecca's mother attended. Had there been meaningful glances exchanged, secret conversations in corners? His father had always been particularly generous to Rebecca's family, ensuring they had the best of everything despite their modest means. At the time, it had seemed like simple kindness from a wealthy friend. Gregory ran his hands through his carefully styled hair, messing it up completely. The weight of uncertainty pressed down on him like a physical force. His father, the man he'd idolized, the business titan who'd built an empire. Had he lived a double life? Had he betrayed not just his wife, but his entire family? The empty church felt too big and too small all at once. Gregory stood abruptly, his decision made. He needed answers, and only one person could provide them. His mother would know the truth about his father's past. She had to. He strode down the aisle, his footsteps echoing in the vacant space. As he pushed open the heavy wooden doors, he could see the last of the wedding guests departing in their cars. The media had already gathered at the gates, their cameras flashing like lightning. Gregory ignored them all, heading straight for his car. He had to get to his mother's house. The time for secrets was over. Gregory's car crunched on the familiar gravel driveway of his childhood home. His mother's elegant, Tudor-style house stood before him, its windows gleaming in the late afternoon sun. His hands trembled slightly as he cut the engine. Through the front window, he could see his mother, Elizabeth Mansfield, arranging flowers in the living room. She looked up at the sound of his car, her face showing immediate concern when she saw him still in his wedding attire. "Gregory," she called out as he entered. "What's happened? Why aren't you at your wedding?" He pulled the crumpled letters from his pocket, the papers that Lillian had thrust into his hands before he left the church. "Mom, I need you to explain these." His mother's face paled as she took the letters. Her hand shook as she unfolded the first one, her eyes scanning the familiar handwriting. "Where did you get these?" "Lillian found them. She interrupted the wedding to tell everyone that Rebecca—" His voice caught. "That Rebecca is my sister, that Dad had an affair with her mother." Elizabeth sank onto the plush sofa, pressing her hand to her mouth. "Oh, Gregory." "Is it true?" he demanded, pacing the Persian rug. "Did Dad have an affair with Caroline?" His mother was quiet for a long moment, smoothing the letters on her lap. "It's complicated, darling. Caroline and I were best friends once. She and your father grew very close during a difficult time in our marriage." "That's not an answer, Mom." "No, your father didn't have an affair with Caroline," Elizabeth said firmly. But there were emotional entanglements. Things got messy. Caroline developed feelings for your father, and he was flattered by the attention. Gregory stopped pacing. What happened? We all made mistakes. I was busy with charity work. Your father was consumed by the business, and Caroline was lonely after her divorce. The three of us were tangled in a complicated friendship that eventually fell apart. Elizabeth stood, walking to the mantel where family photos stood in silver frames. There are things we never told you, Gregory. Your father helped Caroline financially because he felt guilty about how everything ended. She cut ties with both of us, moved away, and when she returned years later with Rebecca, we all pretended nothing had happened. But these letters, Gregory held up the damning evidence, were expressions of emotional turmoil, not proof of an affair, his mother finished. Caroline wrote to your father often, but he never responded. I found those letters after he died. Gregory sank into an armchair, his head spinning. So Rebecca isn't my sister? No, darling, but there are other secrets we kept from you, about why Caroline left, about the real reason your father was so generous to her family, about promises that were made and broken. Gregory stood abruptly. This wasn't the clear answer he'd hoped for. Instead, he had more questions than ever. He needed to know the whole truth, not just pieces of it. I have to go, he said, heading for the door. His mother called after him, but he kept walking. The truth was out there somewhere, buried in the past, and he was determined to find it. Gregory sat cross-legged on his study floor, surrounded by dusty photo albums and boxes of old papers that hadn't seen daylight in years. His bow tie hung loose around his neck like a defeated flag, and his wedding jacket lay discarded on a nearby chair, still carrying the faint scent of flowers from the ceremony. The setting sun cast long shadows through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse apartment, painting everything in shades of amber and gold. He opened another leather-bound album, its spine crackling with age, and his breath caught in his throat. There was Caroline, Rebecca's mother, young and radiant at what looked like a summer barbecue, her smile as bright as the sunshine around her. She stood between his parents, one arm wrapped around his father's waist, the other around his mother's shoulders. They all looked so happy, so comfortable together, like pieces of a puzzle that fit perfectly. Flipping through more pages, his fingers trembling slightly, Gregory noticed a pattern that made his heart race. Caroline appeared in countless family photos, holidays, vacations, casual gatherings, far more than any family friend should. In many of them, she and his father stood close, sharing what looked like private jokes or deep conversations, their body language speaking volumes. This doesn't prove anything, he muttered into the quiet room, but his stomach tightened as he discovered an envelope filled with old letters, yellowed with age. His father's distinctive handwriting covered several pages, addressing Caroline with a warmth that seemed more than friendly, each word weighted with hidden meaning. Gregory's hands trembled as he reached for his phone, nearly knocking over a stack of photos in the process. He scrolled through his contacts until he found Lillian's number, his thumb hovering for a moment before pressing it. Despite the chaos she'd caused at the wedding, despite everything, she might be the only person who could help him now. The phone rang 3 times before she answered, each ring echoing in his ears. Gregory? Her voice was hesitant, laden with concern. Lillian, we need to talk about the DNA test you mentioned. Where did you get it done? His voice came out steadier than he felt. At Gentech Labs downtown, I have all the documentation, every single page. Gregory rubbed his temples, fighting off a growing headache. Could the results have been tampered with? Is there any way to verify them? I need to be absolutely certain. We could go back to the lab, Lillian suggested, her voice growing more confident. I know one of the technicians there. She might be able to help us check the authenticity of the results. She's very thorough. Can you meet me there tomorrow morning? I need to know the truth, Lillian. No more surprises, no more public revelations. Just facts. He gripped the phone tighter, as if it were a lifeline. There was a pause on the other end, heavy with unspoken words. Of course, she said softly. I'll meet you there at 9. We'll figure this out together. After hanging up, Gregory tried to organize the scattered photos and papers, but his mind was racing too much to focus, each thought chasing the next like shadows in the fading light. He moved to his bedroom, knowing sleep would be impossible, his feet dragging with exhaustion. The night stretched ahead of him, full of questions about his father, about Rebecca, about everything he thought he knew, threatening to overwhelm him completely. The early morning sun cast long shadows across the sterile hallways of Gentech Labs as Gregory and Lillian walked purposefully toward the reception desk. Gregory's usually immaculate appearance showed signs of his sleepless night, his tie slightly crooked, dark circles under his eyes. "Dr. Martinez is in Lab 3, the receptionist said after checking their appointment. "Down the hall, third door on the right." They found the technician hunched over a microscope, his white lab coat wrinkled from a long shift. He looked up as they entered, and his face immediately tensed. "Dr. Martinez?" Lillian stepped forward. "We need to discuss the DNA test results you processed last month." The technician's hands trembled slightly as he removed his protective gloves. I'm quite busy at the moment. Perhaps we could schedule—" "This can't wait," Gregory interrupted, his voice firm but controlled. "These results have turned people's lives upside down. We need answers now." Dr. Martinez's eyes darted between them and the door. "The results were processed according to standard protocols." "Were they?" Lillian pulled out a folder. "Because I've had other labs review the methodology, and they've found some concerning inconsistencies." The technician's facade began to crack. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he gripped the edge of his lab bench. I don't know what you're talking about." Gregory stepped closer, his presence imposing despite his exhaustion. "Dr. Martinez, please. People's lives are at stake here. We need the truth." The silence stretched for several long moments before the technician's shoulders slumped. "I'm sorry," he whispered, sinking onto a nearby stool. "The results, they were altered." Lillian gasped softly while Gregory remained stone-faced. "Why?" he demanded. "A man approached me about a month ago," Dr. Martinez continued, his voice shaking. "He offered me money. More money than I'd make in 5 years. Said all I had to do was make sure the results showed a specific genetic relationship." "Who was he?" Gregory's knuckles were white as he gripped the back of a chair. The technician shook his head. "I never got his name. He wore expensive clothes, spoke very precisely, but that's all I know, I swear. He paid in cash, left no trace." "Do you realize what you've done?" Lillian's voice was sharp with anger. "The pain you've caused?" "I can provide you with the original unaltered results," Dr. Martinez offered quickly. "I kept them, just in case." Gregory stepped forward. "We need those results, and we need any security footage from when this man visited you." "The footage won't help," the technician replied, looking down at his hands. "He met me off-site, at a coffee shop downtown. I never saw him here." Gregory and Lillian exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of fury and determination. The truth about the DNA results had been revealed, but they were still left with more questions than answers about who had orchestrated this deception and why. Gregory and Lillian sat at a quiet corner table in the coffee shop across from the lab, both still processing the technician's confession. Steam rose from their untouched cups as they leaned in, speaking in hushed tones. "We need more information," Lillian said, tapping her fingers on the table. "What about Dr. Sarah Chen? She's worked at the lab for years and she's known your family forever." Gregory nodded, pulling out his phone. "Good thinking. She might have noticed something." He dialed the number, and within minutes, Dr. Chen agreed to meet them during her lunch break. An hour later, they sat in the lab's break room with Dr. Chen, a petite woman in her 50s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She glanced around before speaking. "Martinez has been acting different lately," she said, stirring her tea. "About a month ago, he started coming to work in designer clothes. Then last week, he pulled up in a brand new Tesla." Lillian leaned forward. "Did he mention where the money came from?" "He was very vocal about some smart investments he'd made," Dr. Chen replied, making air quotes. But James has worked here for 10 years and he's always lived paycheck to paycheck. The sudden wealth, it didn't add up. Gregory's jaw tightened. Did you notice anything else unusual around the time our DNA tests were being processed? Dr. Chen's expression turned serious. Actually, yes. There was this man who came to see Martinez several times. Always wore expensive suits, carried himself like someone important. I saw them talking in the parking lot once, very secretive-like. Could you describe him? Lillian asked, pulling out a notebook. Tall, probably in his 50s, gray hair, well-groomed. He had this distinct way of walking, very proper, like he'd had military training or something. Gregory and Lillian exchanged meaningful looks. Would we be able to access the security footage from that time? Gregory asked. The lab keeps footage for 3 months, Dr. Chen confirmed. You'd need authorization from the director, but given the circumstances and your family's connection to the facility, that shouldn't be a problem. They thanked Dr. Chen for her help, and as she returned to work, Gregory and Lillian formulated their plan to review the security tapes, hoping to finally put a face to the mysterious figure behind the DNA test manipulation. Let's go talk to the director, Gregory said, standing up. The sooner we identify this person, the closer we'll be to understanding why someone wanted to sabotage my wedding. Gregory and Lillian walked through the lab's sterile hallways, their footsteps echoing against the polished floors. The sharp scent of disinfectant filled the air as they passed rows of sophisticated equipment behind glass walls. Dr. Chen had recommended Dr. Thompson, a senior technician with an impeccable reputation, to handle their new DNA test. I've worked here for 20 years, Dr. Thompson said, adjusting her lab coat as she led them to the testing area. Her voice carried the confidence of someone who had performed these procedures countless times. We'll follow every protocol exactly as required. Her gray hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her steady hands moved with practiced precision as she prepared the testing materials, methodically arranging them on a clean steel tray. Gregory sat in the designated chair, rolling up his sleeve. His fingers trembled slightly as he adjusted the fabric. I appreciate your help with this, Dr. Thompson. We need absolute certainty. Of course, she nodded, preparing the collection supplies with careful movements. I'll document every step of the process, and you're welcome to observe everything. Transparency is our highest priority here. Lillian stood nearby, her arms crossed and her eyes sharp as she watched Dr. Thompson collect Gregory's DNA sample through a simple cheek swab. The technician's movements were fluid and precise as she methodically labeled the sample and entered the information into the computer system, her fingers flying across the keyboard with practiced ease. Now, Dr. Thompson said, pulling up the necessary forms on her computer screen, which cast a blue glow across her focused features. Let's complete the paperwork. We'll need signatures from both of you as witnesses. Gregory and Lillian spent the next 20 minutes carefully reviewing and signing each document, the weight of their task evident in their deliberate movements. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as they worked through the stack of papers, making sure everything was properly documented. Each signature felt more significant than the last. How long will the results take? Lillian asked, setting down her pen and massaging her writing hand. Given the circumstances, I can expedite the process, Dr. Thompson replied, her expression sympathetic but professional. We should have results within 48 hours. I understand the urgency of your situation. While Dr. Thompson began the initial processing steps, Gregory and Lillian sat in the waiting area's uncomfortable plastic chairs. The antiseptic smell of the lab made everything feel more clinical and serious, reinforcing the gravity of what they were doing. Whatever the results show, Gregory said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper, at least we'll know the truth. Lillian nodded, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Are you ready for either outcome? Her eyes searched his face with concern. I have to be, he replied, running a hand through his hair, his wedding ring catching the harsh fluorescent light. Rebecca deserves the truth, whatever it might be. We've come too far to turn back now. They watched through the observation window as Dr. Thompson carefully handled their samples, following each protocol with meticulous attention to detail. The machinery hummed to life, beginning its careful analysis. its lights blinking steadily like mechanical heartbeats. "That's all we can do for now," Dr. Thompson said, emerging from the testing area and removing her latex gloves with a snap. "I'll contact you both as soon as the results are ready. Try to get some rest if you can." Gregory and Lillian stood, thanking Dr. Thompson for her help. Then, Lillian made a request, asking if they could view the lab and the surroundings' CCTV footage. They wanted to try and look for evidence of any suspicious activity after Lillian had provided the samples for the previous DNA test. Gregory and Lillian sat in the lab's security office, surrounded by multiple screens displaying different camera angles. The security officer, Mike Barnes, typed commands into the computer, pulling up footage from 3 weeks ago. "We can access all exterior and interior cameras from that time period," Mike explained, adjusting the viewing parameters. "Just let me know if you want to focus on any particular area." They started with the entrance footage, watching people come and go through the lab's glass doors. Hours seemed to crawl by as they observed the mundane routine of daily operations. "Wait," Lillian pointed suddenly at one of the screens. "Go back about 30 seconds. Mike rewound the footage. A figure in a dark blazer walked purposefully through the entrance, their face partially hidden by long hair and large sunglasses. Gregory leaned forward, his heart racing. Something about the way the person moved caught his attention. "That walk. I know that walk." They followed the figure through different camera angles as they made their way to the testing area. The footage showed them speaking with the technician who had admitted to tampering with the results. "Can you enhance this section?" Gregory asked, his voice tight with recognition. Mike typed a few commands and the image became clearer. The figure turned slightly, giving them a better view of their profile. "That's Margaret Wilson," Gregory said, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. "She was my father's personal assistant for 15 years. Lillian touched Gregory's arm. "Are you absolutely sure?" "I'd know that posture anywhere," he nodded. "She always carried herself like that. Straight-backed, chin up. Plus, that's the exact way she used to walk. Always in a hurry, but trying to look composed." Mike enhanced the footage further, focusing on the moment Margaret handed something to the technician. Though the object wasn't clearly visible, the technician's furtive glances around the room spoke volumes about the nature of their interaction. "Can we get a copy of this footage?" Lillian asked Mike. "I'll prepare it right away," Mike replied, already working on extracting the relevant sections. Gregory sat back in his chair, his mind racing. Margaret had been more than just an assistant. She had been privy to his father's most private affairs. If anyone knew the truth about his father's past, it would be her. "This proves she was involved," Lillian said, watching as Mike prepared their copy of the footage. "But why would she do this?" Gregory shook his head, feeling a mix of relief at having found a solid lead and dread at what other secrets Margaret might be protecting. "I don't know, but we're going to find out." Mike handed them a sealed envelope containing the video files. "Here's everything from that day, including all the angles we reviewed." They thanked Mike and left the security office, both processing what they had discovered. In the elevator, Gregory held the envelope tightly, finally having tangible evidence of the manipulation that had thrown his life into chaos. "We need to confront her," Gregory said as they walked through the lobby. "Margaret has some explaining to do." Lillian nodded, her expression determined. "She won't be expecting us. We have the advantage of surprise." They stepped out into the afternoon sun, the weight of their discovery heavy on their shoulders, but with a clear purpose ahead of them. The mystery of the tampered DNA results was beginning to unravel, and Margaret Wilson held the key to understanding why. Gregory and Lillian stood before the heavy wooden door of his father's old office. A thin layer of dust coated the brass nameplate that still read Charles Mansfield, CEO. Gregory's hand trembled slightly as he turned the key in the lock. The door creaked open, revealing a room frozen in time. Boxes were stacked against walls, and sheets draped over furniture created ghostly shapes in the dim light. The musty smell of aged paper and forgotten memories filled the air. "I haven't been in here since—" Gregory's voice trailed off as he flipped the light switch. The fluorescent lights flickered to life, illuminating years of accumulated dust. Lillian moved to the nearest stack of boxes. Where should we start? The filing cabinet behind his desk, Gregory said, already heading toward it. That's where he kept his personal files. They worked methodically, carefully examining folders and documents. After an hour of searching, Lillian gasped softly. "Gregory, look at this." She held up a manila envelope filled with photographs. They showed Margaret Wilson at various company events, but something was different about these images. She wasn't standing at the periphery like a typical assistant. She was front and center, often beside Charles Mansfield, looking confident and commanding. "There's more," Gregory said, pulling out a stack of letters from another drawer. His eyes widened as he scanned the contents. "These aren't just work correspondence. They're personal letters between my father and Margaret. She wasn't just giving him business advice, she was helping shape major company decisions." They found documents showing Margaret's signature on crucial contracts, her name listed as a key strategist on major projects. There were even handwritten notes from Charles seeking her opinion on various matters, both personal and professional. "Look at this memo," Lillian said, holding up a yellowed paper. "Your father gave her power of attorney for several business dealings. That's an enormous amount of trust." Gregory sat heavily in his father's old chair, running his hands through his hair. She wasn't just an assistant. She was his right hand, his confidant. He picked up another photograph, this one showing Margaret at what appeared to be a private dinner with his father. They were both laughing, comfortable in each other's presence. Lillian continued sorting through the files, pulling out more evidence of Margaret's deep involvement in the company. There were strategic plans in her handwriting, detailed analyses of business opportunities, and even personal notes about the Mansfield family. "She knew everything about us," Gregory said quietly, examining a folder containing family records. Every detail, every secret. She was practically part of the family. The weight of their discovery settled over them as they continued to uncover more documents. Margaret Wilson hadn't just been an employee. She had been instrumental in building and maintaining the Mansfield empire, working alongside Charles in ways that went far beyond the typical duties of an assistant. Back at Gregory's home, he and Lillian spread the documents from his father's office across his mahogany dining room table. The evening light cast long shadows through the windows as they organized everything chronologically. "Look at these memos," Lillian said, pointing to dates. Margaret's influence grew steadily from 1985 to 1990. She went from basic administrative work to handling major acquisitions. Gregory nodded, studying a series of photographs. The way they're standing together changed too. "See here?" He laid out 3 photos in sequence. They became closer, more familiar. Their body language tells a story. As they worked through the papers, Gregory noticed something odd about his father's desk calendar. There's a slight gap between these pages. He carefully pried at the wooden backing, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside lay a bundle of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon. The first letter was written in Margaret's flowing script. "Charles, today meant everything to me. Our connection goes beyond mere business. You understand me in ways no one else does." Lillian watched Gregory's face as he read through more letters. His hands shook slightly as the story unfolded. Passionate declarations of love gave way to increasingly desperate pleas. "She writes here about Dad spending more time at home," Gregory said, his voice tight. "Listen to this. I thought what we had was special, but you're slipping away. Your wife, your family. They'll never understand you like I do." The letters grew more bitter as time passed. Margaret's elegant handwriting became sharp and angry. "How dare you push me aside after everything we've built together? This company is as much mine as it is yours." One particularly harsh letter caught Lillian's attention. "This one's from 1991, she said. "You've made your choice, Charles. Your precious family wins. But don't think for a moment I'll fade quietly into the background. You've taken everything from me, my dreams, my future, my dignity." At the bottom of the stack lay the final letter, its paper creased and worn as if it had been read many times. Margaret's words burned with cold fury. "Consider this my farewell, Charles. You've chosen your path and I'll choose mine. Don't think I'll ever forget how you cast me aside when it became inconvenient." Some betrayals can never be forgiven. You'll remember me, I promise you that. Gregory set the letter down carefully as if it might burn his fingers. She didn't just lose a lover, he said quietly. She lost her position, her influence, everything she'd worked for. Hell hath no fury, Lillian murmured, studying the bitter words of the final letter. Gregory and Lillian sat in the quiet wood-paneled office of Martin Walsh, the Mansfield family's longtime accountant. The afternoon sun filtered through Venetian blinds, casting striped shadows across the desk covered in financial statements and bank records. "These are your father's personal accounts," Martin said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. "I've pulled everything from the past decade." He spread several folders across the desk, each labeled with meticulous care. Gregory leaned forward, scanning the columns of numbers. "There," he pointed. "These monthly transfers. They're substantial. Always the same amount, like clockwork." Lillian picked up one of the statements. $10,000 every month to an offshore account. She glanced at Martin. "Can you trace where these went?" The accountant nodded, pulling out another document. The payments were routed through several shells, but they all led back to an account registered to Margaret Stevens. "The assistant," Gregory said quietly, his jaw tightening. "Dad was paying her off." They dug deeper into the records, finding a clear pattern stretching back years. The payments had started shortly after Margaret's departure from the company, consistent and unwavering. "Your father was very careful about these transactions," Martin explained. "They were structured to appear as consulting fees, but the timing matches perfectly with Margaret's exit from the company." Lillian made notes as they worked through the statements. "The payments continued like this for years until—" She trailed off, pointing to a specific date. "Until Dad died," Gregory finished, his voice hollow. "The last payment was made the month before his passing." Martin nodded solemnly. Without explicit instructions in his will to continue these payments, they stopped automatically. The account was closed shortly after his death. "So Margaret lost her monthly income?" Lillian said, connecting the dots. "After years of being paid to keep quiet about the affair, and probably countless business secrets." "She was suddenly cut off," Gregory added, running a hand through his hair. "No more payments, no more connection to the family, no more leverage." The implications hung heavy in the air. The timing aligned perfectly. The discontinued payments, his father's death, and Margaret's recent actions all fell into a clear pattern of cause and effect. "The DNA test tampering," Lillian said softly. "The wedding disruption. It all started after the payment stopped." Gregory sat back in his chair, the weight of understanding settling on his shoulders. Margaret's actions weren't just about revenge. They were about desperation, about losing both emotional and financial ties to a family she'd been connected to for decades. Back in Gregory's father's office, Gregory and Lillian stood before an old metal filing cabinet, tucked away in the corner. Its dark green paint was chipped, revealing patches of rust underneath. The top drawer remained stubbornly locked, resisting their earlier attempts to open it. "I found this in Dad's desk," Gregory said, holding up a small brass key. His hands trembled slightly as he inserted it into the lock. With a metallic click, the drawer slid open. Inside, they found stacks of letters bound together with fraying rubber bands. The paper had yellowed with age, and many envelopes showed signs of being hastily torn open. "These are all addressed to your father," Lillian noted, carefully removing the first bundle. She slipped out one of the letters and began to read aloud. "You think you can just cut me off? I know everything about your dealings with the Morgan account. How do you think the board would react to that?" Gregory's face paled as he picked up another letter. "Your perfect family image won't survive what I know. The things we did together, the decisions we made. Do you really want your son to know about all of that?" They spread the letters across the desk chronologically. The earliest ones were relatively mild, expressing disappointment and hurt. But as they progressed through the timeline, the tone grew darker, more threatening. "Look at this one," Lillian said, holding up a letter dated just months before Gregory's father's death. "Your time is running out. Either you make this right or I'll make sure everything comes crashing down. Your reputation, your legacy, your son's future, all of it gone." Gregory's hands clenched into fists as he read through more letters. She was trying to blackmail him. These aren't just about their relationship. She's threatening to expose business dealings, company secrets. The final letter in the stack was the most disturbing. Written in harsh, jagged handwriting that nearly tore through the paper, it read, "You've left me no choice. Everything we built, everything we shared, you threw it all away. Now you'll watch it burn. Your son will know exactly what kind of man his father really was." "The dates," Lillian pointed out, arranging the letters in sequence. "They become more frequent right before the payments stopped. She must have sensed something was changing." Gregory slumped into his father's old leather chair, surrounded by the evidence of Margaret's descent from trusted confidant to vengeful tormentor. The letters painted a clear picture of someone whose hurt and betrayal had festered into something much darker over the years. "She wasn't just after money anymore," Lillian said quietly, gathering the letters as evidence. "These show she wanted to destroy everything your father built, including your happiness." Gregory and Lillian sat in the estate's kitchen, where the warm scent of fresh coffee filled the air. Martha, the head housekeeper who had served the family for over 30 years, wrapped her weathered hands around her mug. "That woman," Martha said, shaking her head slowly. "She started out so pleasant, always bringing your father coffee just the way he liked it. But over time, something changed in her." Gregory leaned forward. "What do you mean, Martha?" "It was subtle at first. She'd make little comments to the staff suggesting your father didn't appreciate our work. She'd hint that raises were being withheld because your mother was too controlling with the household budget." Martha's eyes clouded with memory. "Before long, she had half the staff questioning their positions here." Lillian took notes as Martha continued. "She was clever about it. Never anything too obvious, but she planted seeds of doubt everywhere she went." The kitchen door swung open as James, the elderly groundskeeper, joined them. His face was weathered from years working in the gardens, but his eyes were sharp and alert. "I remember hearing her one evening," James said, settling into a chair. "I was trimming the hedges outside your father's study. The windows were open and she was inside with him. She was saying things like, 'Everything I've done for you, all these years of loyalty, and this is how you repay me?'" Gregory's jaw tightened. "When was this?" "Must have been about 2 years ago," James replied. "She didn't know I was there, of course. She kept going on about how she'd given up everything for him, how she could have had her own family but stayed devoted to his interests instead." Martha nodded gravely. "After that, she started spreading rumors among the business associates who'd visit. Nothing direct, mind you, but she'd drop hints about financial irregularities or family problems. Some of our longest-standing business partners started acting differently around your father." "I caught her once," James added, his voice low. "Late at night in your father's study. She was going through his files, muttering to herself about making things right. When she saw me, she claimed she was organizing paperwork, but her hands were shaking. She was building toward something," Lillian observed, looking at her notes. "This wasn't just anger. It was calculated." "Oh, it was calculated all right," Martha agreed. "I overheard her on the phone once, saying she'd make sure the Mansfield name wouldn't mean anything anymore, that she'd tear it all down, brick by brick if she had to." Gregory rubbed his temples, processing the information. The assistant's influence had run deeper than he'd imagined, touching every aspect of their lives like poison slowly seeping through water. "She was patient," James said, his voice heavy with concern. "Worked her way into every crack she could find, gathering information, turning people against each other. Always with a smile on her face, too. That's what made it so unsettling." Martha reached across the table and patted Gregory's hand. "We should have said something sooner, dear. But she was so careful, so methodical. By the time we realized what she was doing, she'd already built quite a web around your father." Gregory's phone buzzed as he and Lillian sat in his study reviewing the collected evidence. The caller ID showed the lab's number, and his heart skipped a beat. "Hello?" His voice was steady despite his racing pulse. "Mr. Mansfield, this is Dr. Chen from Metropolitan Labs. The results of your DNA test are ready. Could you come in to discuss them?" Gregory looked at Lillian, who nodded encouragingly. "We'll be there in 30 minutes." The drive to the lab felt endless. Neither spoke much, both lost in thought about what the results might mean. The modern glass building reflected the morning sun as they pulled into the parking lot. Dr. Chen, a petite woman with kind eyes, greeted them in her office. She held a manila envelope in her hands. "Thank you for coming in," she said, gesturing for them to sit. "I wanted to deliver these results personally given the sensitivity of the situation." She opened the envelope and spread several papers across her desk. "I'll be direct. The DNA analysis shows conclusively that you and Ms. Rebecca are not biologically related, not even distantly. The previous results were definitely falsified." Gregory exhaled deeply, feeling as if a weight had lifted from his shoulders. Lillian squeezed his arm in support. "We ran the test twice to be absolutely certain," Dr. Chen continued, pointing to specific markers on the results. "There's no room for interpretation here. You are definitively not siblings." After collecting the paperwork and thanking Dr. Chen, Gregory and Lillian found a quiet coffee shop nearby to process the news. "This changes everything," Lillian said, stirring her coffee absently. "Rebecca needs to know right away." Gregory nodded, staring at the test results. "Yes, but it's not just about the DNA anymore. The assistant's manipulation, the way she poisoned everything." He trailed off, his jaw tightening. "One step at a time," Lillian advised. "First, we clear up this sibling nonsense. Then we deal with the assistant." They gathered their things, the test results safely tucked into Gregory's briefcase. As they walked to the car, both felt lighter, knowing they had concrete proof to counter the lies that had derailed the wedding. Yet there was also a heaviness in knowing that clearing up one deception only revealed the depth of another's betrayal. Gregory and Lillian waited in the elegant conference room of the Mansfield building. The assistant, Margaret Wells, had readily agreed to meet when Gregory mentioned discussing her financial arrangements. The door opened and Margaret walked in, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, wearing an expensive suit that spoke of the years of comfort Gregory's father had provided. Her confident smile faltered slightly when she saw Lillian. "I wasn't expecting company," Margaret said, settling into a chair. Gregory placed a folder on the table. "We need to discuss something more important than money, Margaret." "Not!" He spread out the evidence methodically, the threatening letters, financial records, and finally the new DNA test results. Margaret's face grew paler with each document. "You orchestrated all of this," Lillian said quietly. "The fake DNA results, the wedding disruption, everything to hurt Gregory and his father's legacy." Margaret's hands trembled as she touched one of the old letters. "You don't understand," she whispered. "Your father promised me everything, Gregory. A life together. A future." Her composed facade cracked. "We were in love for 15 years. 15 years. Then suddenly he decided to do the right thing and return to your mother." Tears welled in her eyes. "He kept me quiet with money, like I was some dirty secret to be swept under the rug. When he died, even that stopped. It was like I never existed. Like those 15 years meant nothing." "So you tried to destroy my happiness?" Gregory's voice was tight with controlled anger. Margaret's shoulders slumped. "I wanted him to hurt the way I hurt. Even after he was gone, I wanted to tarnish everything he built, everything he chose over me." She looked at the DNA results. "I paid the technician to falsify the results. I knew it would ruin the wedding, scandal the family name." "You let your bitterness poison you," Lillian observed. "Yes," Margaret admitted, wiping her eyes. "I became so consumed by revenge that I lost sight of who I used to be. The person your father actually loved would never have done this." Gregory sat back, studying the woman who had once been like a second mother to him. "All those years when I thought you cared about me." "I did care, Gregory. That's what makes this worse. I let my hatred for your father overshadow my love for you." Margaret's voice broke. "I'm so sorry. I know it doesn't change anything, but I am truly sorry." The small cafe was quiet in the late afternoon. sunlight streaming through large windows onto the polished wooden tables. Rebecca sat across from Gregory and Lillian, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. Her face showed the strain of the past weeks, but there was still strength in her posture. Gregory pulled out the lab results and placed them gently on the table. "We found out the truth, Rebecca. The original DNA test was tampered with. We're not siblings." Rebecca's hands trembled slightly as she reached for the papers. "Not siblings?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "No," Lillian confirmed, leaning forward. "It was all a lie orchestrated by Margaret Wells, Gregory's father's former assistant." Gregory explained everything: the years-long affair between his father and Margaret, the payments that had kept her quiet, and how their discontinuation after his father's death had sparked her revenge. "She paid the lab technician to falsify the results," Gregory said, his voice tight with controlled emotion. "She wanted to destroy my father's legacy by ruining our wedding and creating a scandal." Rebecca listened intently, her eyes widening as each layer of deception was revealed. "All this because of a broken heart?" she asked, shaking her head in disbelief. 15 years of lies and secret payments," Lillian explained. "When it all stopped, she just broke. She admitted everything to us yesterday." "She let bitterness consume her," Gregory added. "She used our happiness as a weapon against my father's memory." Rebecca sat back in her chair, processing everything. Relief softened her features, but there was still a shadow of hurt in her eyes. "The way she manipulated all of us, it's almost unbelievable." "We had to know the truth," Lillian said. "We couldn't let her lies stand." Rebecca reached across the table and squeezed both their hands. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for not giving up, for finding the truth." She smiled, and for the first time in weeks it reached her eyes. "It feels like I can breathe again, like a weight has been lifted." The late afternoon sun cast a warm glow over their table as they sat together, three friends bound even closer by the ordeal they had overcome. The autumn breeze rustled through the trees as Gregory and Rebecca walked side by side along the park's winding path. Golden leaves crunched beneath their feet, and the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the grass. They had chosen this quiet spot, away from prying eyes and the weight of recent events. "I keep thinking about how close we came to losing everything," Rebecca said softly, her arms wrapped around herself against the cool air. Gregory stopped walking and turned to face her. "I never stopped believing in us, even when everything seemed impossible." Rebecca's eyes met his, filled with both vulnerability and determination. The hardest part wasn't even the false revelation itself. It was the doubt, the way it made me question everything I thought I knew. "I understand," Gregory said, gently taking her hand. "When I found out about my father's past, about Margaret's deception, it shook my whole world. But the one thing I never doubted was how I feel about you." They found a wooden bench overlooking a small pond, where ducks glided peacefully across the surface. Rebecca settled beside Gregory, their shoulders touching. "I want us to be stronger because of this," she said. "Not just move past it, but really learn from it. Build something even more honest and real." Gregory nodded, squeezing her hand. "No more secrets. No more letting other people's actions define our story." He turned to face her fully. "What do you want, Rebecca? Not what our families want. Not what society expects. What do you want?" A smile touched Rebecca's lips. "I want us. I want to marry you, but this time on our terms. Something smaller, more intimate maybe." "We could plan it together," Gregory suggested, his eyes lighting up. "No wedding planners, no media circus, just us creating the day we want." "I'd like that," Rebecca said, leaning into him. "We could find a new date somewhere a few months from now. Give ourselves time to do it right. And give our families time to adjust to the changes," Gregory added with a knowing smile. Rebecca laughed softly. "They'll have to accept it. This is our story now." They sat together in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the sun's rays dance on the pond's surface. The weight of recent weeks seemed to lift from their shoulders with each passing minute. Should we make it official again? Gregory asked, his voice warm with affection. Renew our engagement? Rebecca turned to him, her eyes bright. Yes, but this time knowing we're stronger for everything we've been through. Gregory pulled her close, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. Then let's go tell our families. Together. They stood from the bench, hands intertwined, ready to face whatever came next as a united front. The path ahead of them stretched clear and bright, no longer shadowed by doubt or deception. Gregory sat at his desk, reviewing the intimate wedding venue options he and Rebecca had shortlisted. Just then, his phone buzzed, displaying the local police department's number. Mr. Mansfield speaking, he answered, his voice steady but cautious. Mr. Mansfield, this is Detective Morrison. We need to discuss some developments in the investigation of Margaret Chen's case. Gregory's shoulders tensed. What kind of developments? During questioning, Ms. Chen revealed she wasn't working alone. She claims Thomas Blackwood, your father's former aide, orchestrated the entire scheme. The name hit Gregory like a physical blow. Thomas Blackwood had been his father's fiercest business rival before becoming an aide, a relationship that had always seemed strange to Gregory. I'm on my way, Gregory said, already reaching for his coat. At the police station, Gregory met Lillian in the lobby. Her face showed the same concern he felt. Detective Morrison led them to a small conference room where case files lay spread across the table. Ms. Chen was quite detailed in her confession, Morrison explained, opening a folder. According to her, Blackwood approached her 6 months ago with the plan to disrupt your wedding and damage your reputation. He provided the funds for bribing the lab technician and orchestrated the timing of the revelation. But why? Lillian asked, leaning forward. What would he gain from this? Ms. Chen claims it's part of a larger scheme to destabilize Mansfield Industries, Morrison replied. Apparently, Blackwood never forgave your father for certain past business dealings. Gregory rubbed his temples, memories of board meetings where Blackwood and his father had clashed flooding back. We need to understand more about his involvement with my father's company. I know some of the old-timers who worked closely with both of them, Lillian said, pulling out her phone. Sarah Jenkins was your father's secretary during that period, and Marcus Thompson worked in finance. Gregory nodded, his expression determined. Set up meetings with both of them. We need to know everything about Blackwood's history with my father. While Lillian made the calls, Gregory studied the police files. The pieces were starting to fit together. Blackwood's sudden shift from rival to aide, his careful positioning within the company, and his disappearance shortly after Gregory's father's death. Sarah can meet us tonight at her home, Lillian announced, and Marcus agreed to breakfast tomorrow at the downtown diner. Good, Gregory said, closing the file. Detective Morrison will keep you informed of anything we discover. The detective nodded. Just be careful. Blackwood's proven he's willing to go to extreme lengths to achieve his goals. As they left the police station, Gregory and Lillian quickly formulated their plan. They would meet Sarah first, then Marcus, hoping to piece together the full story of Blackwood's vendetta against the Mansfield family. I'll pick you up at 7, Lillian said, checking her watch. That gives us time to prepare our questions. Gregory agreed, his mind already racing with the implications of this new threat. The truth about his father's complicated past seemed to keep unraveling, revealing deeper layers of betrayal and rivalry. Gregory and Lillian stood in the dimly lit basement of Mansfield Industries, surrounded by towering shelves of dusty boxes and filing cabinets. The musty air made Lillian sneeze as she pulled another box from a high shelf. Look at this, she said, holding up a yellowed folder. Employee records from the takeover period. Gregory moved closer, shining his phone's flashlight on the documents. These are all the people who lost their positions when my father acquired Sterling Technologies. They spread the files across an old wooden table, creating a timeline of events. Names jumped out at them, people who had dedicated decades to Sterling only to find themselves suddenly unemployed. Wait, Lillian pointed to a memo. Look at these transfer orders. They're all signed by Blackwood, but the dates don't match up with the official records. Gregory frowned, comparing the documents. He was moving assets before the takeover was even announced. These employees were let go based on falsified performance reports. They contacted Janet Morris, a former department head, who had been particularly vocal about her dismissal. She agreed to meet them at a quiet coffee shop downtown. Blackwood was ruthless, Janet explained, her hands wrapped tightly around her coffee cup. He manufactured reasons to fire anyone who might have opposed the takeover. But it was more than that. He seemed to enjoy destroying people's careers. Another former employee, Robert Chen, shared similar experiences. Blackwood promised to protect our positions if we shared sensitive company information. Then he used that same information against us, claiming we had breached confidentiality agreements. As they gathered more testimonies, a pattern emerged. Blackwood had systematically undermined Sterling Technologies from within, weakening it for the takeover while simultaneously building evidence against loyal employees. "Here's the smoking gun," Lillian said, pulling out a document from another archive box. It was an internal memo from Blackwood to a private investigator, dated months before the takeover. The memo detailed plans to gather compromising information on key employees. He wasn't just bitter about losing control, Gregory realized, scanning the memo. He orchestrated events to maximize the damage to people's lives, and now he's trying to do the same thing to me. They found more evidence: suspicious bank transfers, altered meeting minutes, and a trail of correspondence that showed Blackwood's careful manipulation of events. Each piece added to a picture of calculated revenge that had spanned decades. A former board member, William Hayes, provided the final piece. "Blackwood swore he would destroy everything your father built," he told them. He said he would wait as long as it took, but the Mansfield name would end in ruins. With their evidence organized chronologically and supported by witness statements, Gregory and Lillian knew they had what they needed. The documents proved not only Blackwood's involvement in the current situation, but established a clear pattern of vindictive behavior stretching back years. "He's not going to stop," Lillian said, reviewing their findings. "This vendetta against your family has consumed his entire life." Gregory nodded, placing the last document in their evidence file. "Then it's time we put an end to it." That afternoon, Gregory and Lillian went over at the private dining room at LeBlanc, an upscale restaurant known for its discretion. They had chosen this location carefully, public enough to ensure safety, private enough for a delicate conversation. James Blackwood, the aide, arrived precisely on time, dressed impeccably in a tailored gray suit. His silver hair was neatly combed, and his demeanor exuded confidence as he approached their table. "Mr. Mansfield, Ms. Harrison," he greeted them with a practiced smile. "I must admit, I was intrigued by your invitation." Gregory gestured to the empty chair. "Please sit down, we have much to discuss." Once they had ordered drinks, Gregory placed a thick manila folder on the table. "Mr. Blackwood, we know everything." "I'm afraid I don't understand," Blackwood replied smoothly, though his eyes fixed on the folder. Lillian opened it and began laying out documents one by one. The falsified performance reports from Sterling Technologies, the memo to the private investigator, the orchestrated dismissals of loyal employees. Blackwood's smile didn't waver, but his hands tightened slightly around his water glass. Ancient history, and nothing to do with current events. "Then perhaps these will interest you more," Gregory said quietly, producing another set of papers. "Bank transfers to the lab technician who tampered with the DNA results, your correspondence with my father's former assistant, the carefully planned scheme to destroy my wedding and my reputation." For the first time, Blackwood's composure cracked slightly. A muscle twitched in his jaw. "We have statements from Janet Morris, Robert Chen, and William Hayes," Lillian continued. "They've all come forward about your role in destroying their careers during the takeover." "Disgruntled former employees," Blackwood scoffed, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. Their words would hardly stand up in court. "But the paper trail you left behind certainly will," Gregory responded, sliding forward the memo about gathering compromising information. "Your signature, your words, your vindictive plan laid out in black and white." Blackwood stared at the document, his face growing pale. "You don't understand," he whispered. "Your father took everything from me. Everything I'd spent my life building." "So you spent decades plotting revenge?" Lillian asked. Manipulating people, destroying lives, all to satisfy your need for vengeance? Gregory leaned forward. You didn't just target my father. You were willing to ruin Rebecca's life, to let her believe she couldn't marry the man she loved because of a lie you helped create. The weight of his actions seemed to settle on Blackwood's shoulders. His carefully maintained facade crumbled as he looked at the evidence spread before him. I wanted him to suffer, Blackwood admitted, his voice thick with emotion. I wanted the Mansfield name destroyed, just as he destroyed mine. But he looked at Gregory, really looked at him for the first time. I never considered the cost to innocent people, the pain I would cause. Tears welled in his eyes as decades of bitterness finally gave way to regret. I became so focused on revenge that I lost sight of everything else. I'm sorry, Gregory. Truly sorry. The next morning, Gregory sat in his corner office with his legal team. Papers and folders covered the massive oak conference table, each document telling part of the story of betrayal and manipulation. The evidence is substantial, Sarah Chen, his lead attorney, said as she organized the files. We have documented proof of financial transactions, witness statements, and written correspondence that clearly shows premeditation. Gregory nodded, studying the timeline his team had created. And you're certain this is enough for criminal charges? More than enough, confirmed James Martinez, another member of the legal team. The paper trail alone proves conspiracy and fraud. The witness testimonies from former employees add weight to the pattern of malicious behavior. The team spent the next hour meticulously reviewing each piece of evidence. They organized everything chronologically, building a clear narrative of the aide's systematic attempt to destroy both Gregory's personal life and business reputation. Later that afternoon, Gregory and his legal team presented their findings to the authorities. Detective Wilson listened intently as they laid out the evidence, his expression growing increasingly serious with each new revelation. This is exceptional work, the detective said, examining the bank statements showing payments to the lab technician. With evidence this comprehensive, we can move quickly. Within hours, news crews gathered outside the police station as officers led the aide away in handcuffs. Cameras flashed while reporters called out questions. Gregory stood quietly to the side, watching as justice took its course. The media coverage was immediate and extensive. Headlines praised Gregory's resilience in uncovering the truth. Business journals highlighted his integrity throughout the ordeal, and public support poured in from colleagues and competitors alike. The trial proceeded swiftly, with the prosecution presenting their overwhelming evidence. Each day brought new revelations about the extent of the aide's deceptions. The business community watched closely as the story unfolded, and Gregory's reputation not only recovered but grew stronger. As the guilty verdict was read, Gregory felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The aide's schemes had been exposed, justice had been served, and his family's legacy was secure once again. His company's stock price began to recover, and business partnerships that had been put on hold were renewed with enthusiasm. The evening breeze rustled through the manicured hedges of the botanical gardens as Gregory and Rebecca walked hand in hand along the winding stone path. Fragrant roses and delicate orchids lined their way, creating a peaceful atmosphere that felt worlds away from the chaos they'd recently overcome. This feels right, Rebecca said, pausing to admire a cluster of white lilies. Just us and the people who matter most. Gregory squeezed her hand gently. No media circus this time. No grand spectacle, just our love and those who've stood by us through everything. They settled onto a wooden bench overlooking a small koi pond. Rebecca pulled out her phone, showing Gregory the simple design she'd chosen for their invitations. I thought we could host it here, in this garden, maybe right there by the gazebo. It's perfect, Gregory agreed, imagining their intimate ceremony. We could set up chairs for about 30 people, just family and our closest friends. They spent the next hour discussing details, both appreciating how different this felt from their previous wedding preparations. Instead of elaborate flower arrangements, they chose wildflowers from the garden. Rather than a 7-tier cake, they selected a simple 2-layer design from a local bakery they both loved. I want to write my own vows this time, Rebecca said softly. Real words from my heart, not just traditional promises. Gregory's eyes lit up. I'd like that too. These past months have given me so much to say about what you mean to me, about how much stronger we've become together. Rebecca leaned her head on his shoulder. I've already started working on mine. Every time I think about what to say, I remember how you never gave up on us, how you fought to uncover the truth. And I think about your strength, Gregory replied, how you faced every challenge with grace and courage. They continued their walk through the garden, stopping occasionally to make notes about the ceremony layout or discuss small details. Lillian had offered to handle the music arrangements, while Rebecca's mother volunteered to coordinate with the caterer for their intimate reception. My mom's so excited to help, Rebecca shared. She says it feels like a fresh start for everyone. That's exactly what it is, Gregory agreed. A new beginning, built on truth and trust. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the garden paths, they found themselves at a peaceful overlook. The sky painted itself in brilliant shades of orange and pink, reflecting off the pond's surface below. Rebecca wrapped her arms around Gregory's waist. Thank you for suggesting we take this time to plan everything together. It feels so much more meaningful this way. That's what I want our marriage to be like, Gregory said, holding her close. Every decision made together, every moment shared. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink lower on the horizon. The garden's tranquility enveloped them, a perfect mirror of the peace they'd found in each other after weathering their storms together. The day of Gregory and Rebecca's intimate wedding finally arrived, and the workers were moving around the botanical gardens, making final preparations. White chairs formed neat rows along the stone path leading to a flower-adorned gazebo, while soft classical music drifted through the air from a string quartet tucked beneath a nearby maple tree. 30 carefully chosen guests mingled quietly, their voices mixing with birdsong and the gentle splash of the koi pond. Lillian adjusted a bouquet of wildflowers, making sure each stem sat perfectly in its crystal vase. In a small garden cottage serving as the bridal suite, Rebecca stood before a vintage mirror, smoothing the silk of her elegant but simple ivory dress. Unlike her first elaborate wedding gown, this one felt true to who she was, graceful, understated, and real. You look beautiful, her mother whispered, securing a sprig of baby's breath in Rebecca's loosely curled hair. At the gazebo, Gregory waited with quiet confidence, his dark suit complemented by a single white rose boutonniere. His eyes lit up as the string quartet began playing Canon in D, and the guests rose to their feet. Rebecca appeared at the garden path's entrance holding a bouquet of fresh wildflowers. Her dress caught the morning light as she walked toward Gregory, her steps sure and steady. Their eyes met and held, both remembering the journey that had brought them to this moment. When she reached him, Gregory took her hands in his, their fingers intertwining naturally. The officiant welcomed everyone warmly, speaking about the power of love that overcomes all obstacles. Then came time for their vows. Gregory spoke first, his voice clear and strong. Rebecca, our love has been tested in ways we never imagined, but it emerged stronger and truer. I promise to always be honest with you, to trust in our bond, and to face whatever life brings us together. You are my partner, my best friend, and my true love. Rebecca's eyes glistened as she delivered her vows. Gregory, you showed me what real love means, not just in the easy moments, but in the hardest ones too. I promise to stand beside you always, to trust in our truth, and to love you more deeply with each passing day. You are my strength, my joy, and my home. They exchanged rings, simple gold bands that symbolized their enduring commitment. Their closest friends and family watched with tear-filled smiles, knowing the depth of meaning behind each word and gesture. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, their kiss was sweet and tender, filled with promise. The small gathering erupted in heartfelt applause and cheers, celebrating not just a marriage, but the triumph of love over adversity. As they turned to face their guests, now officially married, sunlight streamed through the gazebo's latticework, creating patterns of light and shadow that danced across their joyful faces. The string quartet struck up a celebratory tune, and rose petals showered down around them as they took their first steps together as husband and wife. The intimate reception took place in the garden's glass-enclosed pavilion, where twinkling lights draped from the ceiling created a magical atmosphere. Round tables adorned with wildflower centerpieces hosted the small gathering of guests, who chatted warmly over plates of carefully selected dishes. Soft jazz music played as servers moved gracefully between tables, refilling champagne glasses. Rebecca sat beside Gregory at the main table, her hand often finding his as they shared quiet moments between conversations with their guests. When the time came for toasts, Gregory stood, gently tapping his crystal glass. The room fell silent, all eyes turning to him with warm expectation. He looked at Rebecca, his eyes full of love, before addressing their gathered loved ones. "These past months have taught us that love isn't just about the perfect moments," Gregory began, his voice steady and sincere. "It's about standing together when everything else falls apart. To everyone in this room, you've shown us what true friendship and family mean. Your support never wavered, even when the truth seemed impossible to find." He turned to face Rebecca directly. "And to my beautiful wife, your strength amazes me every day. Together, we've learned that honesty and trust aren't just words, they're choices we make every single day. I couldn't be more excited to build our future together." Glasses clinked as everyone toasted the couple. Lillian wiped away tears, while Rebecca's mother beamed with pride. The gathering felt intimate and genuine, exactly what Gregory and Rebecca had wanted. As the evening progressed, guests shared stories around the tables. Rebecca's childhood friend recalled their college days, while Gregory's business partner spoke about watching the couple's relationship bloom. Each story highlighted the genuine connection between the newlyweds. The dance floor filled with couples swaying to the music. String lights reflected off the glass walls, creating a starlit effect inside the pavilion. When a slow song began playing, Gregory led Rebecca to the center of the floor. Other dancers stepped back, giving them space for their moment. They moved together under the twinkling lights, their steps in perfect harmony. Rebecca rested her head on Gregory's shoulder as they swayed, finally at peace. The secrets that had once threatened to tear them apart now lay exposed and powerless, leaving only their strengthened love and trust. Around them, their closest friends and family watched with joy, celebrating not just a wedding, but the triumph of truth and love over deception. The soft music enveloped the couple as they danced, marking the beginning of their honest new chapter together. If you enjoyed the story of Gregory and Rebecca, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.